My love, I whispered to the alien woman, and in that silence our hearts spoke wildly. Whispers across the void. The atmospheric research station of Altaris Nebula hung like a gleaming ornament against the backdrop of swirling purple gases and distant stars. Marco Soren adjusted the environmental settings in the station's botanical laboratory, his fingers moving deftly across the control panel. As the station's lead xenobotanist, he found peace among the collection of extraterrestrial flora that few humans ever witnessed. Dr. Soren, your presence is requested at the diplomatic reception in 30 minutes, the station's AI announced, interrupting his concentration. Marco sighed, brushing soil from his hands. Another parade of officials who couldn't tell a Jovian moss spore from a Saturnian lichen, he muttered. Nevertheless, he changed into his formal Science Division uniform, navy blue with silver, trim that accentuated his tall frame, and warm brown skin. The station's grand observation deck had been transformed for the evening's event. Representatives from 17 planetary systems mingled under the transparent dome that revealed the nebula's mesmerizing dance of cosmic dust and energy. You look like you'd rather be anywhere else, commented Dr. Eliza Chen, the station's administrator, appearing beside him with 2 glasses of blue effervescent liquid. Is it that obvious? Marco accepted the drink with a small smile. I just don't see how making small talk advances scientific discovery. Funding, partnerships, permissions to explore restricted territories, Eliza counted off on her fingers. Speaking of which, the Solarian delegation has finally arrived. Their homeworld rarely sends representatives this far. Marco followed her gaze across the room and felt an unexpected flutter in his chest. Among the delegation stood a figure unlike any he had ever seen. Her skin held a subtle luminescence that seemed to pulse with its own internal rhythm, casting a soft glow that highlighted her delicate features. Her eyes, large and iridescent, reflected the nebula's colors like living prisms. Who is she? He asked, unable to look away. Liriana Vex, their senior diplomatic envoy and apparently some kind of botanical specialist as well. Thought you might want to meet her. Before Marco could respond, Eliza was guiding him across the room. The Solarian woman turned as they approached, and Marco felt as if those remarkable eyes were seeing through him rather than at him. Envoy Vex, may I present Dr. Marco Soren, our xenobotanical research lead, Eliza said smoothly. Dr. Soren. Liriana's voice had an unusual harmonic quality, like 2 tones speaking at once. I have studied your work on adaptive plant communication networks. Most insightful. Thank you, Marco replied, finding his professional voice. I've never had the opportunity to discuss Solarian botanical practices before. Few have. A subtle shift in her luminescence suggested amusement. Perhaps that should change. I understand you maintain specimens of the rare celestial orchid? Marco nodded, surprised. We have 3 varieties. They're notoriously difficult to sustain off their native moon. On my world, they are considered sacred. I would be curious to see your methods. Something in her phrasing suggested more than scientific interest, and Marco felt an inexplicable connection forming between them, tenuous as a spider's silk, yet somehow equally resilient. I'd be honored to show you our collection, he said, meaning it more than he had intended. As the nebula's light played across her features, Liriana's lips curved into a smile that seemed to hold secrets of distant stars. Then we have much to discuss, Dr. Soren, she replied, more than either of us might expect. Language of Stardust. 3 days after the diplomatic reception, Marco found himself adjusting the humidity controls in the botanical lab with unusual attention to detail. He checked his reflection in a polished panel, an uncharacteristic gesture that made him smile ruefully at himself. The Solarian envoy has arrived at the laboratory entrance, announced the station. Marco straightened his lab coat. Thank you. Please grant Ambassador Vex full access to botanical section. When Liriana entered, the plant seemed to respond to her presence. Subtle movements rippled through the leaf structures of the specimens nearest to her, as if drawn to the gentle luminescence that emanated from her skin. Fascinating, Marco observed. They're responding to your bioluminescent signature. Liriana moved closer to a container housing delicate blue-violet flowers. On my world, we believe all living things communicate in frequencies beyond conventional understanding. Her voice carried that distinctive dual-toned quality that Marco found increasingly mesmerizing. Your celestial orchids appear to remember their origins. I've documented unusual reactions before, but never this pronounced. Marco gestured toward his workstation. Would you mind if I took some readings? She tilted her head in assent. As he calibrated his instruments, the silence between them felt comfortable rather than awkward. Your understanding of xenobotany is impressive for... He hesitated. For a diplomat? Liriana finished, a subtle pulse of amusement illuminating her features. Before I represented my people's interests across star systems, I studied the sacred connection between consciousness and plant life. A botanist turned diplomat. I'd love to hear that story. Their conversation flowed naturally as Marco showed her through the laboratory. When they reached the rare specimens section, Liriana stopped before a sealed environmental chamber containing luminous flowering vines. Calis luminae, she whispered, placing her hand against the transparent barrier. These were believed extinct on their native world. We rescued these specimens during an expedition to the Rigel system. The planet was experiencing catastrophic climate collapse. Liriana's expression grew solemn. My people have ancient texts describing how these vines once created vast networks connecting entire ecosystems. Without thinking, Marco activated the chamber's access protocols. Would you like to examine them directly? Her eyes widened. That would be most meaningful. Inside the specialized chamber, they donned thin protective gloves. As Liriana gently touched one of the vines, it responded immediately, curling delicately toward her fingertips. The plant's bioluminescence intensified, matching the subtle pulses emanating from her skin. Remarkable, Marco whispered. It's almost as if they recognize something familiar, she finished. A resonance pattern. Their eyes met over the glowing specimen, and Marco felt something shift between them, a connection forming beyond scientific curiosity. The moment was interrupted by a sudden violent shudder that rocked the entire station. Warning lights flashed as the emergency systems engaged. Attention all personnel. Structural integrity breach detected in Section 7. Emergency protocols initiated. All non-essential personnel evacuate to designated safety zones. Marco quickly secured the specimen. That's 2 sections over, near the atmospheric processing units. My delegation was scheduled to tour that section, Liriana said, concern evident in her voice. Another violent tremor shook the laboratory, sending equipment crashing to the floor. The lights flickered ominously. A loud cracking sound preceded a rupture in the laboratory's ceiling. Warning klaxons blared as pressure alarms activated. We need to reach the emergency airlock, Marco said urgently, taking Liriana's hand without thinking. Her skin was surprisingly warm against his, a gentle current seeming to pass between them. They navigated through the increasingly damaged laboratory as the station's integrity continued to deteriorate. Reaching the emergency airlock, they found the automated systems unresponsive. The primary controls are damaged, Marco said, examining the panel. Allow me. Liriana placed her hands on the control surface. The luminescence in her skin intensified, patterns flowing down her arms like living circuitry. The airlock system suddenly reactivated, doors sliding open. How did you... An ability of my people, she explained as they hurried inside. We can synchronize our energy patterns with certain technologies. Once sealed inside the airlock corridor, they caught their breath. Emergency lighting cast them in a soft blue glow. Thank you, Marco said. That was impressive. Liriana's luminescence dimmed slightly, her equivalent of a blush. We should locate my delegation and determine what caused the breach. As they made their way through emergency corridors, Marco realized he was still holding her hand. More surprising was that neither of them seemed inclined to let go. Forbidden Orbit's 14 standard days after the station incident, Marco found himself in an unprecedented position, working directly with Liriana on a joint human-Solarian research initiative. The investigation had revealed the breach was caused by a micrometeorite storm, not sabotage as initially feared. The shared crisis had accelerated diplomatic relations, opening doors to collaborative projects. Your analysis of the cross-species germination patterns is quite thorough, Liriana observed, reviewing his data on the laboratory's holographic display. In the soft ambient light, Her natural luminescence created dancing patterns across the workstation. I couldn't have interpreted the quantum resonance patterns without your insights, Marco replied, aware of how easily they had fallen into a rhythm of shared research. Your people's understanding of botanical consciousness far exceeds our own. The laboratory door slid open as Dr. Chen entered, her expression unusually grave. Marco, Ambassador Vex, we've received a communication from the Solarian High Council. They're expressing concerns about the scope of your collaboration. Liriana's luminescence dimmed noticeably. What specific concerns? They believe certain botanical knowledge is sacred to your people and not meant for interspecies sharing, Chen explained carefully. They've requested you limit your research exchanges to previously approved topics. After Chen departed, a heavy silence settled between them. Marco watched as Liriana moved to the observation window overlooking the nebula, her reflection superimposed against the cosmic backdrop. There are factions within my government who oppose closer relations with humans, she finally said. They believe our biological differences make true understanding impossible. Marco joined her at the window. And what do you believe? Her eyes met his, iridescent depths reflecting starlight. I believe understanding transcends biological form, but my position requires adherence to certain boundaries. Professional boundaries, Marco clarified, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. Yes, she responded, her voice softening, although I find those boundaries increasingly arbitrary. The admission hung between them, charged with unspoken implications. Marco noticed how the luminescent patterns beneath her skin had formed intricate, pulsating designs, a physiological response he'd come to recognize as emotional intensity. The station's annual celestial viewing is tomorrow evening, he said, changing the subject to safer ground. The nebula will align with the twin stars of the system, creating a spectacle few ever witness. I would like to experience this, she replied. For scientific observation, of course. Of course, he echoed, a smile playing at his lips. The following evening, they met at the station's most remote observation deck, a small, seldom used platform with an unobstructed view of space. The automated systems had provided them with thermal blankets against the cooler temperature maintained in this section. As the celestial alignment began, ribbons of cosmic energy danced across the nebula, igniting gases into brilliant patterns of turquoise, violet, and gold. The twin stars pulsed in resonance, their gravitational interplay creating visible waves through the surrounding space. It's beautiful, Liriana whispered, her own luminescence responding to the spectacle, rippling in harmonious patterns. There's a theory, Marco said, watching her rather than the cosmic display, that consciousness evolved in response to such beauty, that life itself is drawn toward harmony and connection. She turned to him, her expression unguarded. My people have a similar belief. We call it Vashira, the sacred pull between kindred energies. Is that what this is? He asked, gesturing vaguely between them. Vashira? Liriana's luminescence intensified. Vashira is rare between different species. It would be unprecedented. Yet here we are, Marco said softly. Here we are, she echoed, moving closer until their shoulders touched. As the cosmic light show reached its crescendo, Marco tentatively reached for her hand. Their fingers intertwined, his solid and warm, hers delicate and subtly luminous. Where they touched, a gentle vibration seemed to pass between them. My love, he whispered in the quiet of that moment, the words escaping before he could consider their implications. Liriana didn't speak, but her entire being seemed to respond. The luminescent patterns beneath her skin forming intricate, pulsating designs that flowed toward their joined hands. In the silence, something profound and wordless passed between them. A recognition that transcended language, species, and the vast differences of their origins. Eclipse of Worlds. The days following their moment on the observation deck took on a dreamlike quality for Marco. Their research continued publicly, but private moments, shared glances across the laboratory, fingertips brushing while exchanging specimens, conversations that lingered long after work hours, became increasingly precious. The Administrative Council has requested your presence. Dr. Soren, the station AI announced one morning as Marco cataloged specimen data. Liriana looked up from her workstation, concern evident in her luminescent patterns. Is something wrong? Probably budget requests again, he reassured her, though uncertainty nagged at him. In the council chamber, Marco found not only Dr. Chen but also Admiral Vasquez, the station's military liaison, and two representatives from Earth's Interplanetary Affairs Office. Dr. Soren, Chen began formally, we've received communications from both Earth Central Command and the Solarian High Council regarding your collaboration with Ambassador Vex. Admiral Vasquez cut in. To be blunt, Doctor, your personal relationship with the ambassador has been noted by multiple parties and is causing diplomatic complications. Marco felt his pulse quicken. With respect, Admiral, my relationship with Ambassador Vex is professional. We're making groundbreaking discoveries in cross-species botanical communication. And meeting alone on remote observation decks? One of the Earth representatives slid forward a data pad showing surveillance images of their private moment during the celestial alignment. The Solarian Council has expressed grave concerns about potential cultural contamination. Cultural contamination? Marco repeated incredulously. She's a diplomatic envoy specifically sent to facilitate exchange. There are exchange protocols, Chen said gently. The Solarians are particularly sensitive about personal relationships with other species. There are biological and cultural taboos. This is absurd, Marco interrupted. We're both adults capable of determining appropriate boundaries. Nevertheless, Admiral Vasquez stated firmly, you will restrict your interactions to supervised laboratory sessions only. The future of several pending treaties depends on maintaining proper diplomatic relations. Marco left the meeting seething with frustration. He found Liriana waiting anxiously in an adjacent corridor. They've restricted our contact, he said without preamble. Apparently, we're threatening galactic peace by watching stars together. Her luminescence dimmed noticeably. I've received similar directives from my council. They believe I've been compromised. Compromised? The word stung more than he expected. They fear I've developed emotional attachments that cloud my diplomatic judgment. Her voice carried a sadness he hadn't heard before. Among my people, to form such connections with other species is considered unnatural. And have you? Marco asked quietly. Formed attachments? Her eyes met his, iridescent depths revealing vulnerability. You know I have. They found a secluded alcove in the botanical section, surrounded by specimens they had studied together. Time seemed suspended in this small space that belonged only to them. What happens now? Marco asked. I've been recalled to Solaria, she said softly. They're sending a replacement diplomat tomorrow. The news hit him like physical pain. So quickly. There must be something. Wait, Liriana interrupted, her head tilting as if listening. Something's wrong with the environmental systems. Marco checked his datapad. Oxygen levels are dropping throughout this section. Alarms suddenly blared across the station. Emergency protocols engaged. Atmospheric contamination detected in sections 3 through 7. All personnel evacuate immediately. They rushed toward the nearest emergency station, finding chaos as crew members hurried through corridors. Dr. Chen intercepted them, her face grave. It's sabotage, she said tersely. Someone's introduced a pathogen into the air circulation system. It's specifically targeting areas where Solarian delegation members are located. My people, Liriana gasped, her luminescence flaring with distress. They've been evacuated to quarantine, Chen assured her. But the pathogen is spreading. We need your botanical expertise, both of you. It appears to be a hybrid bioform with plant-based components. In the secured laboratory, they examined the pathogen samples. Marco had never seen Liriana work with such intense focus, her hands moving with precise efficiency. This is engineered, she concluded grimly. A modified strain of Calestis toxica, a rare botanical neurotoxin that affects my species' unique nervous system. Who would have access to something like this? Marco asked. Liriana's expression hardened. Few beyond my homeworld. This came from Solaria. Your own people would attack their delegation? Those who oppose our diplomatic mission, who fear connection with other species. Her voice turned bitter. They would rather sabotage peace than risk contamination. Working frantically, they developed a neutralizing agent derived from the celestial orchids they'd studied together. As station personnel dispersed it through the ventilation systems, Marco realized the implications. If your own government is behind this, you can't return to Solaria. The reality of their situation settled between them, her exile from her world, his defiance of direct orders. In that moment, Personal feelings and diplomatic protocols seemed equally impossible to reconcile. "Whatever comes next," Liriana said, her luminescence forming the intricate pattern he now recognized as deep emotional truth. "We face it together." As the crisis subsided, they stood in the laboratory that had brought them together, hands intertwined, creating their own small constellation of defiance against the vast, cold politics of worlds that feared what they couldn't understand. Constellation of Promises. The diplomatic fallout from the sabotage attempt reverberated through interstellar channels. Evidence implicating radical Solarian isolationists was transmitted to both governments, triggering investigations and tense negotiations. Liriana's departure was postponed indefinitely while the situation unfolded. 1 month after the attack, Marco and Liriana were summoned to a secure communication chamber. Admiral Vasquez waited with an expression that revealed nothing. "The station has received a direct transmission from the Solarian High Council," he announced. "They've requested to speak with both of you privately." Vasquez left them alone as the communication screen activated. 3 Solarians appeared, elders whose luminescence patterns indicated their elevated status. "Ambassador Vex," the central figure began, "your actions during the recent crisis have been reviewed extensively by this council." Liriana stood tall, her posture formal, though Marco could see the tension in her luminescent patterns. "I acted to protect both Solarian and human lives, honored elders." "Indeed." The elder's tone revealed nothing. "Your collaboration with the human xenobotanist prevented significant casualties." The elder to the right spoke. "The isolationist faction responsible has been identified and contained. Their actions do not represent Solarian policy. However," continued the third elder, "your personal relationship with Dr. Soren remains unprecedented. There is no protocol for such connections." Marco stepped forward. "With respect, honored elders, perhaps it's time for new protocols. Our work together demonstrates the potential when our species truly collaborate." A long silence followed. The central elder finally spoke again. "Ambassador Vex, this council has reached a decision. You will not be recalled to Solaria." Liriana's luminescence flared with surprise. "Instead," the elder continued, "we propose establishing a permanent joint research initiative between our worlds, focusing on botanical communication networks. You will serve as its Solarian director, alongside Dr. Soren as human director. The initiative would require close collaboration," the third elder added, a subtle shift in luminescence suggesting acknowledgement of their personal relationship. "We believe exploring new forms of connection may benefit both our species." After the transmission ended, Marco and Liriana stood in stunned silence. "Did that just happen?" he finally asked. "It appears," Liriana said slowly, her luminescence forming patterns of wonder, "that even the most rigid structures can adapt when necessary." 3 months later, they stood on the observation platform of the newly commissioned research vessel Harmonia, watching as it disengaged from Altera Station. The ship would travel between human and Solarian territories, a floating laboratory and diplomatic outpost combined. Their private quarters reflected their unique partnership. Environmental controls that accommodated both species, a small garden of specimens meaningful to both their worlds, and a viewing dome that allowed them to observe the stars together. As the ship entered the nebula's embrace, casting their quarters in multicolored light, Liriana approached Marco. Without the constraints of diplomacy or secrecy, she allowed her luminescence to fully express what she felt. Intricate patterns flowing across her skin in waves of emotion that Marco had learned to read as clearly as spoken words. "I have been studying human customs," she said softly, taking his hands in hers. "There is one I find particularly meaningful: the exchange of promises between those who choose to build a life together." Marco's heart quickened. "It's typically accompanied by symbolic objects, rings or tokens. On Solaria we exchange light patterns," she explained. "A unique signature created for one's chosen partner, visible only to them." She guided his hand to rest against the center of her chest, where her luminescence intensified beneath his palm. Slowly, a new pattern formed, one he had never seen before, intricate and profoundly beautiful. "This pattern now exists only for you," she whispered. "It carries my promise to navigate all stars and worlds by your side." Deeply moved, Marco reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. a crystalline pendant containing a miniature celestial orchid suspended in transparent resin. Among the stars across all worlds, through light years and lifetimes, he said, placing it around her neck, my heart recognizes yours. As the Harmonia accelerated toward the boundary between their worlds, Liriana and Marco stood silhouetted against the cosmic vista. Two beings from distant stars who had defied politics, biology, and convention to create something unprecedented. A love that spoke not in words but in the silent language of hearts who had found, against all odds, their perfect resonance. Their story would become legend among both species, not merely as the beginning of new diplomatic relations, but as living proof that the truest connections transcend all boundaries, even those between stars. In the quiet of their shared space, as nebula light played across their entwined figures, no words were necessary. Their hearts, like the twin stars of Altaris, had formed their own gravity, a force that would continue to shape worlds long after this moment had passed into memory.